Hey everyone, my name is Friendzoned and welcome to the third episode of Friendzoned Produces. If you're not familiar with the concept behind this series, let me shortly explain. So there's a form in the description of the video where anyone can offer me guidelines to follow in the creation of a track. So if you want to leave me some guidelines, go down there and fill up the form. Today's guidelines are from Francesco, who wanted a mix of two genres, Synth Wave and dubstep. He also requested some electric guitar elements in the track. Now, if you haven't listened to the track yet, please do so, there's a link in the description, and otherwise I will tackle this video in two parts. I'll first talk about the synthwave part, and then about the dubstep part. So let's start with the synthwave elements. Now, I won't really go in depth about what synthwave is or how it's supposed to sound. There are plenty of videos out there covering this topic. I'll just break down what I consider to be most interesting in the first section of the track. Synthwave is supposed to be inspired by old school 80s track, and this feel is mostly attained by using lots of heavily sidechained synth. So as you can see, I have 4 synths, only dedicated to the higher end of the spectrum, playing either chords or fills. You can see that all those tracks are frozen and grouped with themselves, and that's because as of today, you can't freeze a track that has a sidechain compressor on it. If you freeze a track without the sidechain compression, group it to itself and then place a sidechain compressor on the group, then you can freeze the track and it saves a lot of CPU power. So the first 3 layers are mostly saw waves run through filters. And of course with the sidechain compression. I also added this pluck track over here just to give it a bit of movement. This pluck movement is achieved by automating the cutoff of the low pass filter here with this LFO. And of course you add your usual effects, EQ, multiband dynamics, maybe some OTT and so on. Only those are a bit boring by themselves, so I added a lead with lots of reverb and delay to make it a bit spicy. And of course a sub bass. Now, in addition to that, I respected the electric guitar guideline by playing the same chords the pads were playing up there, and this gives a bit more texture to the track. I also used my guitar in the introduction with an auto pan going a bit crazy. If you set up the phase over here to 0, it basically turns it into a chopper, and I use this trick to change a bit the texture of the sound. Now, as far as the drums in blue are concerned here, there's only one thing you have to do to get that 80s feel, and it's to have a super wet reverb, especially on the snare. Of course, add a kick and a tiny bit of hi-hats here and there, and you get this. So that's basically all there is to the main synthwave elements. And now we'll turn to the nasty stuff. So I'll start with the central part of any dubstep track, which is the bass. As you can see, this is another project file. And I recommend you do a separate project file for your sound design sessions, mostly because sound design can be extremely CPU demanding. Also, splitting the two makes me at least work more efficiently on the actual music afterwards without getting stuck on the sound design part. So I won't talk too much about actual sound design in itself in this video, mostly because there are thousands of better tutorials out there. Also because they're basically just serum patches that I made with a shit ton of effect afterwards. And they all sound like this. I still do want to explain how to make the most out of several patches, especially when you have lots. In this project I only have 3, I think in the original one I had 7. But we're going to create what is called an automatic Hocket machine. Now this technique isn't mine, I learned it on Mr. Bill's channel, there's a link in the description because he explains it super clearly. I'm just going to quickly break down what he said in his video. So props to him, this is not my idea, but I think it's extremely useful and you should learn about it. So basically the idea is to create several nasty patches like those and then link them so that they play with the sub bass randomly. So each time the sub bass will be triggered, one of those out of random will be selected and we'll play with it. So this is the sub bass that will take care of the low end. Now we're trying to get a random patch to play every time our sub bass is triggered here. So in order to do this, we must group all of those together. Let's rename those mid basses. And in our group mid bass, we'll drop an audio effect track, open the chains here, and we'll create as many chains as we have nasty mid basses. So in this case, it's 3. Let's rename them 1, 2, and 3. In each of them, we will drop a compressor. We will also turn on the sidechain and take the audio from the relevant patch. So in this case, it's 1, here it's 2, and here it's 3. Now we want to turn on this little blue headphones button down there. So what this does is that the compressor lets the input signal pass through when played, and this allows each chain here to get the input signal from only one of the patches and not the 3 of them at the same time. Now we still want to have only one patch playing at the same time, and in order to do this, we will click here, open the macro control rack, and this macro will be mapped to the on and off button of those compressors if you wish. So the best way to do this is to right click here and map to macro 1. Same for this one, map to speaker on, map to speaker on. And now this value will control which one of those will be turned on and off. Now to make the most out of it, we have to click the map button and we have to divide those 127 numbers into the numbers of patch that we have here. So in this case, we have 3 patches, 127 divided by 3 is about 43. So we will map those so that each patch only covers a certain value. So in this case, it's from 0 to 43, then 44 to 87, and from this case, 88 to 127. We can close the map thing here. And now if you look over here, every time I change the value, the speaker that is on will change over here. So we've come quite far, but we still have to randomly trigger those mid basses with our sub bass. So let's first change the input section of all of our patches so that the sub bass works as an input. And let's change all of those channels as inputs. So now every time the sub bass will be triggered, one of our patches here will be triggered too, like so. Except now it's only the number 1 that is triggered because the value of the speaker on is left on 0. So now we still have to give the randomization that we need to play one random patch. So the best way to do this is on our sub bass, we will first drop a velocity MIDI effect down there, put the randomness all the way up, put it on fixed, and lower this one on 64. And you can see that this box here tells us that we'll basically have a randomly generated velocity every time we play a note. So make sure that your sub bass is not velocity sensitive, otherwise it will create some strong variations in its volume and you don't really want that for a sub bass. Now next up, we're going to load a max MIDI effect called expression control. And this allows us to map the velocity of the MIDI input to anything on our project. And maybe you guessed it by now, but we're going to map it to our knob down there. So every time a sub bass note will be triggered, a random velocity will be chosen. This random value will come in the expression control. Since we mapped it to the speaker on thing, it will give the random value of the velocity of the sub bass to this speaker on knob. And this will choose each time a random patch. So we can now play our sub bass and a random patch will be played with it, as you can see here. So the beauty of that technique is that any MIDI effect that you'll apply to your sub bass, for example the pitch bend that I have down there for this first note, will also be applied to any of your patches down there. So it's a super effective trick to come up with interesting and varied basses. Now after that you just have to record the whole thing into audio, and when it's finished you just import it to your other project file. So now if we're going to the other project file, you can see the audio flips down there. Maybe one last trick about the bass. I wanted to have a bit more rhythm at some points in the drop. So I added this LFO tool that controls the volume of the mid bass flip that we have here. And I automated it to play at different rates at different times in the drop to give a bit more interesting rhythms. Now going back to the electric guitar guideline, I also added a small lick down there just to lead to the drop. And I also doubled the chords that were played with my electric guitar with lots of saturation. Now add to that some heavily processed and digital drums. And you have your dubstep part. Now I won't talk too much about the last drop because it's mainly the same bass riff with some synthwave elements on top of it. But I think I sort of managed to create a synth step track this time, maybe? Anyway, I hope you learned something interesting today. Thanks for listening. If you want me to create a certain track, go in the description and fill up a form. I'm looking forward to reading them. In the meantime, take care and I'll see you next time.